Parker dragged her suitcase along the polished tiles of our international airport, her mind buzzing with unfinished presentations, client emails, and a nagging sense that she had forgotten something. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow on the crowds of travelers hustling by, many dragging their own luggage, juggling coffee cups, phones, and boarding passes. His eyes were tired, rimmed with faint red streaks from sleepless nights, but she pushed herself forward, determined not to let fatigue interfere with her upcoming trip. Los Angeles was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to pitch an innovative marketing strategy that could catapult her career forward. The flight to Los Angeles promised 3 hours of solitude, of catching up on rest, and she was eager to embrace it. She wheeled her suitcase toward gate B14, nodding the long line of passengers stretching out like a river of anxious bodies. People shifted impatiently, checking watches and smartphones, murmuring complaints about delays and adjusting their carry-ons. Exhaled, feeling the familiar tension of travel pressing down on her chest. She found her place near the gate, scanning the sea of faces. Some seemed excited for vacation, others rushed as if life depended on reaching their destination. The carefree travelers, imagining herself in shorts and sandals, a cocktail in hand, enjoying the West Coast sun instead of the sterile fluorescent light and concrete of Chicago. Boarding was announced, stood, lifting her carry-on and shuffling forward with the mass of passengers, the shuffle of feet echoing in the terminal. She presented her boarding pass, nodded politely to the airline staff, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The interior of the plane smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with recycled air. Found her window seat, set her suitcase beneath it, and settled in. The hum of conversation around her mingled with the rustling of plastic bags, the clicking of buckles, and the distant mechanical sounds of the plane's engines beginning to warm. She sank into her seat with a sigh, sliding over her lap. The fabric of the chair was firm but familiar, and she leaned against the window, watching clouds drift lazily outside as the sun began its descent. A flight attendant moved up and down the aisle, offering instructions, smiles tight but professional, and nodded absently, her mind already slipping into a quiet, anticipatory calm. Other passengers chatted lightly, some typing on laptops, others scrolling through phones, headphones in, immersed in their worlds. Closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the gentle hum of the plane's engine soothe her. It was then that she noticed the faint tremor beneath her feet, a subtle vibration she initially dismissed as routine. Yet the air smelled slightly different, a faint metallic tang she couldn't identify. Her thoughts wandered, probably nothing, just her imagination. She tugged the scarf she had draped around her shoulders closer, and as the plane taxied toward the runway, she let herself drift into a light sleep, lulled by the warmth of the cabin and the rhythmic vibration of the engines. Dreamed of Los Angeles. Sunny skis, palm trees swaying, her meeting going perfectly, clients nodding in admiration, and her boss praising her work. In this half-sleep, she felt a sense of calm wash over her, as if nothing in the world could disrupt the serene bubble around her. She was completely unaware that, miles above the ground, subtle anomalies were beginning to emerge, flickers of tension in the cockpit, small sounds out of place, unnoticed by most passengers. Outside, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, shadowing the sun as if nature itself sensed the approaching turbulence. As the plane lifted off the runway, seat vibrated with the increased intensity of the engines. She didn't notice the worried glances exchanged between the co-pilot and captain. The flight attendants walked down the aisles, performing their final checks, but even they seemed slightly more tense than usual. Lost in her drowsy reverie, noticed none of this. The rhythmic rocking of the plane and the muted conversations around her lulled her deeper into sleep. She had no idea that, within the next few hours, every ounce of composure and courage she possessed would be tested beyond anything she had ever imagined. The cabin lights dimmed gradually, encouraging passengers to relax. Closed her eyes, letting herself sink into a half-conscious state where thoughts of work and responsibility faded, replaced by the comforting drone of the plane. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers twitched slightly in unconscious movement, as if she were grasping at clouds. She shifted slightly, curling against the window, and her mind wandered further into dreams of Los Angeles evenings, glittering city lights, and the carefree freedom of a life temporarily removed from deadlines, calls, and constant pressure. Outside, the sky darkened faster than she realized. The clouds thickened, rolling and swelling with the muted fury of a storm forming miles ahead. Inside, passengers murmured occasionally, unaware of the subtle changes, their conversations continuing with polite laughter, occasional yawns, or distracted glances at screens. Remained oblivious, cocooned in her warm seat, dreaming of success and sunlight. In that moment, the calm inside the plane contrasted sharply with the tension brewing beyond the cabin doors. A sudden jolt rocked the plane gently, a prelude to what was coming but barely stirred. She murmured in sleep, adjusting her scarf around her shoulders. The flight attendants tightened their checks, giving the plane one last sweep, their eyes occasionally flicking toward the cockpit with a hint of unease. The engines hummed steadily, concealing the faint mechanical irregularities growing with every passing minute. Slumber deepened, and she had no inkling that soon, this ordinary flight would become a test of survival, courage, and human connection, unlike anything she had ever faced before. She shifted slightly, resting her head against the cool window glass, and the drone of the plane merged with the rhythm of her thoughts, lulling her further into sleep. Outside, the first flashes of lightning illuminated distant clouds, unnoticed by most passengers, and yet in the cockpit, the captain's frown deepened. He adjusted controls subtly, a shadow of concern passing over his features. Lost in her dreams, had no idea that the serene calm she now felt was the fragile pause before a storm that would change everything. Parker slept deeply, cocooned in her window seat as the plane leveled out above the clouds. The cabin lights had dimmed, leaving a soft glow that encouraged passengers to rest. Around her, the hum of engines blended with muffled conversations, the faint shuffle of feet, and the occasional clink of beverage carts. Most travelers seemed lost in their own worlds, reading, watching movies, or dozing lightly. However, had slipped fully into the sanctuary of sleep, unaware that the serenity she felt was about to shatter. A few rows ahead, a young man fiddled nervously with his phone, glancing repeatedly at the cockpit door. The flight attendants noticed the subtle tension and exchanged quiet, concerned glances. One whispered something under her breath to a colleague, her brow furrowed. Stirred slightly in her seat, adjusting the scarf wrapped around her shoulders, but her drowsiness pulled her back into oblivion. She did not hear the faint mechanical hums and clicks that seemed off, subtle enough that a passenger in deep sleep could miss entirely. Outside, the sky darkened incrementally, the late afternoon sun now hidden behind a growing mass of gray clouds. The turbulence began almost imperceptibly. The plane rocked gently, so slight that many passengers barely noticed, attributing it to ordinary flight movements. But in the cockpit, the captain and co-pilot sat tense, eyes scanning instruments that flickered briefly, an unusual anomaly flashing on the radar. They exchanged a look, a quiet signal that something was amiss. A whisper passed between them, short and precise. "Check the hydraulics," the captain said. The co-pilot nodded, fingers flying over the controls, but the tension was subtle, so subtle that the average passenger remained blissfully unaware. Shifted slightly, feeling the faint vibration of the plane through her seat, but mistook it for normal flight sensation. Down the aisle, flight attendants moved with practiced calm, checking overhead bins and observing passengers with careful vigilance. One attendant paused near a young child in seat 14B, offering a comforting smile as the little boy clutched a stuffed toy. The mother patted her son's head, murmuring reassurance. His eyes fluttered open momentarily, seeing the scene, and a small smile tugged at her lips before sleep claimed her again. It was a world of ordinary comfort, ordinary fear, and ordinary life, all seemingly normal on the surface. Yet outside the plane, the storm clouds thickened ominously. Flashes of lightning illuminated the horizon, though they were distant, casting a pale light over the ocean of clouds beneath them. Turbulence began to grow in intensity, subtle jolts shaking the cabin ever so slightly. Some passengers murmured unease, gripping armrests or exchanging nervous glances. Shifted in her seat, disturbed by the gentle sway but not alarmed. She tucked her scarf, curling slightly against the window, drifting in and out of consciousness as the cabin settled into an uneasy rhythm. A few passengers began to notice minor anomalies, the faint flicker of overhead lights, the unusual hum of an engine, or the occasional sharp click from the cockpit. A teenage girl clutched her tablet tightly, whispering to her mother, "Why is it shaking more than usual?" The mother, trying to maintain calm, whispered reassurance, "It's okay, sweetie, just normal turbulence." Yet even as they spoke, the cabin had taken on a quiet tension. Still half asleep, caught fragments of the conversation, but her mind dismissed them, blending them into the background of a dream about landing safely in Los Angeles. Flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering drinks and checking passengers' comfort. Their smiles were tight, polite, but their eyes betrayed the growing concern. One paused mid-step, looking briefly toward the cockpit, her expression tightening. She resumed walking, performing her duties flawlessly, masking the unease that only insiders and attentive passengers might sense. Shifted again, her head resting on the cool window, drifting in and out of sleep, completely unaware of the invisible tension in the air. Meanwhile, the plane began a subtle climb, responding to shifts in air pressure. Outside, the wind howled faintly at high altitudes, carrying the promise of a brewing storm. Lightning flashes grew slightly closer, illuminating the clouds in jagged streaks of white and purple. Most passengers remained oblivious, absorbed in screens, conversation, or the quiet hum of their own thoughts. But a few sharp eyes noticed the change. The darkness of the clouds, the unusual flicker in the engine panels, the subtle vibration that seemed sharper than before. Deep slumber kept her unaware of the warning signs, cocooned in her own peaceful world. In the cockpit, the captain tapped the controls carefully, scanning instruments, adjusting altitude and speed. "Hydraulics pressure stable for now," he muttered, more to himself than the co-pilot. His voice was calm but controlled, a practiced mask of authority that passengers could never detect. The co-pilot nodded, glancing at the radar, noting the approaching weather system. The plane was fine for the moment, yet the storm brewing outside had the potential to escalate quickly. Peaceful sleep contrasted sharply with the simmering tension above her head. Inside the cabin, shifted slightly, her body responding subconsciously to the minor turbulence. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she burrowed into her scarf, eyes half closed. She imagined herself stepping onto Los Angeles streets, feeling the warm sun on her face, the city alive with endless possibility. The mundane reality of travel, the dim cabin lights, the soft murmurs of passengers, the occasional clatter of a tray or bag, was all part of a normal journey, yet underneath it, the invisible tension of an approaching storm threaded through the air. By now, the subtle jolts had begun to ripple down the aisles. A few passengers whispered questions, seeking reassurance from attendants or neighbors. The stewardesses responded with calm authority, masking any hint of concern, though their eyes flicked repeatedly to the cockpit. Still half asleep, noticed these small flashes of movement, but her mind folded them neatly into dreams. She imagined her meeting going perfectly, clients nodding in approval, and the satisfaction of a job done well. Outside, the clouds grew darker, the wind stronger, but she remained blissfully unaware. The cabin, for all appearances, remained calm. Conversations were subdued, children slept, headphones muffled noise, and passengers leaned into their own routines. Yet the undercurrent of tension grew. Instruments in the cockpit displayed minor inconsistencies, subtle enough to escape most eyes but enough to alert trained pilots. Flight attendants moved with efficiency and quiet concern, scanning rows of passengers for signs of unease. Oblivious drifted deeper into sleep, her breathing even, her body relaxed, unaware that in just a few hours the world inside this plane would be consumed by fear, adrenaline, and the raw instinct to survive. Parker's slumber was shattered by a jolt that rattled the entire cabin. Her eyes snapped open, momentarily blinded by the dim emergency lighting. A low, urgent hum thrummed through the fuselage, resonating in her chest. Around her, murmurs of unease rose, passengers shifting nervously in their seats. Heart pounded as she fumbled for her, the world suddenly unsteady beneath her. She had no idea that within moments, the ordinary flight she had taken countless times would transform into a life-or-death ordeal. A voice cut sharply through the cabin, amplified over the intercom. "Ladies, and please fasten your immediately and remain calm. This is not a drill." The words landed with the weight of steel. Fingers trembled as she clicked her into place, glancing around to assess the reactions of those nearby. Faces were pale, eyes wide, some frozen in disbelief, others already gripping armrests with desperation. The once calm passengers were now unified by a shared shock, a silent acknowledgement that something had gone terribly wrong. "Captain speaking," the voice continued, tense, controlled, but unmistakably urgent. Stomach lurched at the tone. "We're losing control." The words were blunt, leaving no room for misinterpretation. A low murmur of fear swept through the cabin. The phrase "losing control" reverberated in its mind, sharp and terrifying. She swallowed hard, staring at the ceiling as if it could provide answers but found none. The plane shuddered again, stronger this time, and the faint hum had grown into a roar, vibrating in her teeth. Passengers screamed, clutching their seats, whispering frantic prayers and pressing their faces into hands. Children cried in terror, parents attempting to soothe them while their own fear surfaced. The young man ahead gripped the seat in front of him, eyes wide as he muttered, This isn't normal." Own breath caught. She had experienced turbulence before, even strong gusts, but this was something different. Every instinct screamed that the situation had escalated beyond any ordinary flight experience. Flight attendants moved quickly but with deliberate calm, moving down the aisles, checking straps, offering words of reassurance despite the panic rising around them. Noticed a stewardess kneeling beside a young girl, gently tugging her, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart, we're going to be fine." The scene struck in a strange, surreal way. Amid chaos, small acts of kindness continued. She realized that fear could be contagious, but courage, even quiet, subtle courage, could be contagious too. Looked out the window for the first time in awareness. The sky had transformed into a writhing storm of gray and black clouds, illuminated intermittently by lightning. The sun had vanished behind the thick storm front, leaving the plane suspended in a surreal half-light. Outside, the wing trembled, catching flashes of electric white as distant bolts illuminated the turbulence around them. Stomach lurched violently. For the first time, she understood the gravity of the captain's words. Survival was no longer hypothetical. It was immediate, urgent, and terrifying. The plane shuddered violently again, pitching downward slightly. Instinctively gripped her armrest, knuckles white. Panic rippled through her chest as adrenaline surged. The roar of the engines reached an almost unbearable pitch, the vibrations shaking seats, luggage, and even the resolve of those seated around her. Beside her, a man whispered a short prayer, eyes closed. Mind raced. What should she do? How could she stay calm? Each second stretched into eternity as fear gripped every nerve in her body. In the cockpit, the captain and co-pilot moved with urgent precision. Hands flew over controls, toggling switches, adjusting throttle and stabilizers, eyes flicking rapidly between instruments. The co-pilot called out altitudes, velocities, and air pressure readings, his voice steady but urgent. Outside, the storm's intensity grew, gusts rattling the plane violently. Could sense the collective tension in the cabin, a palpable weight pressing down on every passenger, and she realized she was not alone in her fear. Humanity was spread throughout the metal fuselage, terrified yet resilient, frozen yet ready to respond. Took a shallow breath, trying to calm herself. She remembered the safety instructions the flight attendants had repeated so many times. Fastened, mask ready, remain calm. Her rational mind clung to these fragments even as chaos roared around her. She noticed small things, an elderly woman gripping her armrest, trembling, a mother whispering softly to her child, a young man clutching the seat in front of him, sweat beading on his forehead. Even in panic, life continued. People cared for one another, realized courage could be a shared, almost contagious force. Suddenly the plane lurched downward again, sharper this time. Screams erupted, mingling with the roar of the engines and the creak of the fuselage. Pressed herself against the window instinctively, her heart hammering. Her thoughts raced, her parents, her brother, colleagues, in-laws, angels, unfinished business, the life she had left outside the plane. Each memory flashed like lightning, brief but vivid. She realized how quickly ordinary life could be swept away, how fragile and precious it was. The plane tilted, and she gritted her teeth, bracing herself for impact that she hoped would not come. The flight attendants moved with astonishing calm, instructing passengers, checking, distributing oxygen masks as the turbulence worsened. Felt the mask drop nearby and instinctively reached for it, her hands trembling. Around her, the cabin was filled with a cacophony of fear. Children crying, passengers murmuring prayers, the low roar of the engines, and the mechanical creak of a plane under strain. She could hear the captain's voice again, calm but commanding, reassuring everyone, even as she understood they were facing a true test of survival. Her pulse raced. She took a steadying breath, focusing on her surroundings instead of her panic. The flight attendant's composed urgency anchored her. She noticed small gestures, a hand placed gently on a child's shoulder, a reassuring nod from a stranger, a whispered "we'll be okay." She realized that in moments like these, courage did not come from absence of fear but from choosing action despite it. The plane shuddered again, violent and unyielding, yet clung to hope, determined to endure, aware that every second now counted, every breath mattered. As the storm raged outside, the plane pitched and yawed violently. Gripped her armrest, knuckles white, teeth clenched, heart hammering. The lights flickered as if echoing the lightning outside. She whispered a silent prayer, not for escape but for strength to endure. Around her, humanity revealed itself in extraordinary ways. Strangers comforting one another, quiet acts of bravery amidst chaos. Knew that this moment would change her forever, a baptism of fear and courage. The ordinary flight she had expected had vanished entirely, replaced by the raw, primal reality of survival above the clouds. Parker's knuckles were white, gripping the armrest with every ounce of strength she could muster. The plane pitched violently again, tilting as though the air itself had betrayed them. Around her, the cabin had erupted into a cacophony of fear, children screaming, adults shouting, and the metallic groan of the fuselage echoing like a warning. His chest heaved with panicked breaths, but a strange, numbing clarity started to cut through the terror. She had to focus. Survival now required composure, no matter how fleeting. The oxygen masks hung like ominous pendants above each passenger. Some had already snapped them down instinctively and followed suit, fumbling as she pulled the mask over her face and inhaled sharply. The hiss of supplemental oxygen was a grim reminder that this was no ordinary turbulence. This was a battle against the skis themselves. She looked around and noticed the flight attendants, moving rapidly but deliberately, checking that every passenger was secured and calm. Their eyes betrayed concern, yet they radiated a quiet authority that steadied those willing to pay attention. Lightning flashed outside, casting sharp, eerie shadows through the cabin. Saw the silhouette of a young mother holding a terrified toddler to her chest, whispering words of reassurance that seemed barely adequate against the roaring storm. A few rows ahead, a teenage boy pressed his forehead to the seat in front of him, muttering a prayer under his breath. Each act of courage, however small, was a lifeline, a reminder that even in chaos, human connection endured. Realized that survival was not just about mechanics or luck. It was about solidarity, instinct, and the will to act. The plane lurched again, dropping slightly before rising, the sensation of weightlessness making stomachs plummet and hearts skip. His mind raced, cataloging every memory, Her parents, her brother, friends she hadn't spoken to in months, unfinished tasks, unresolved conflicts. The realization hit her hard. Life was fragile and death could arrive suddenly without warning. But alongside this fear came resolve. Panic alone would not save her. She had to observe, listen, and act. Every instruction from the flight attendants was a thread she could cling to amidst the storm. Beside her, an elderly woman shook, lips pressed into a thin line, gripping her own with trembling hands. Gently placed a hand on hers, murmuring, "We'll be okay, just breathe." The woman's eyes met hers, wide with terror, yet a small nod of recognition passed between them, a silent pact of human solidarity. Felt her pulse steady slightly. Helping others, even in small ways, gave her a sense of control, a tiny anchor in a sky that seemed intent on punishing them. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm yet urgent. "We are experiencing severe turbulence. All passengers remain seated with fastened. Follow crew instructions carefully. We are doing everything possible to stabilize the aircraft." Clung to the words, parsing each syllable. There was authority, professionalism, but also an unspoken admission of danger. She could sense the tension in the voice, the precision and experience behind it, and she drew a tentative comfort from it. The crew knew what they were doing, even if the storm seemed insurmountable. Outside the window, lightning illuminated the chaos of the storm. Dark clouds swirled, jagged and chaotic, tossing the plane in violent arcs. Rain lashed against the fuselage, turning the metal exterior into a slick, shimmering sheet. Stomach lurched as the aircraft dipped, the wings wobbling slightly in response to violent gusts. Her body reacted instinctively, muscles tensing, eyes widening, yet a seed of rational thought took root. She focused on breathing, counting silently to 4, grounding herself amid the disorienting movements. Panic could be deadly. Control of mind and body was now her only weapon. Around her, small acts of humanity continued. A man in the aisle reached to steady a panicked child, whispering reassurances with calm conviction. A mother offered her water bottle to another child nearby, an act of simple generosity in the face of calamity. Felt a surge of admiration and relief. Even as fear dominated, human empathy persisted, threading a fragile web of calm amid chaos. She realized that courage was not always bold or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and persistent. The turbulence intensified and the plane shuddered violently, eliciting screams and gasps from passengers. Pressed herself against her seat, gripping armrests as if her strength alone could anchor her to reality. The metallic groans of the aircraft were deafening, echoing through the cabin with a terrifying resonance. Her mind raced. She had no control over the mechanics, the storm, or the plane's trajectory. But she could control herself, her breathing, her focus, her interactions with those around her. Survival now was as much about mental fortitude as it was about physics. Flight attendants moved rapidly down the aisles, checking each seat, adjusting oxygen masks, and offering words of instruction. Notice the calm authority in their movements, the efficiency born of countless hours of training. Their competence was contagious. Passengers who focused on following directions instead of succumbing to panic fared better. Repeated their instructions silently, affirming each step in her mind. Fastened, mask secure, remain calm, assist others if possible. Her fear persisted, but it became a managed, purposeful energy rather than paralyzing dread. Glanced around the cabin, taking stock of faces and gestures. Some were paralyzed with fear, hands clasped over mouths or eyes squeezed shut. Others were quietly helping neighbors, offering comforting words or physical support. She realized that in this shared terror, small acts of courage exponentially. She leaned toward the elderly woman again, tightening her grip slightly, whispering, "We'll make it. We just have to stay focused." The woman exhaled shakily, nodding. For the first time since the announcement, felt a fragment of control returning, a glimmer of agency in the chaos. The plane shuddered again, violent but less extreme than before, as if testing its passengers' endurance. Closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, breathing in rhythm with the cabin's muted chaos. Thoughts of life, mortality, and responsibility raced through her mind, tempered by the realization that panic was useless. This moment demanded courage, clarity, and calm action. She could feel her body responding to the terror, adrenaline surging, but she forced herself to focus, to act rationally, and to observe. Each small act of control reinforced her resolve, each conscious choice anchored her to survival. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the swirling storm outside. The wings tilted slightly as the plane caught a gust, a stark reminder of the forces beyond human control. Pulse raced, yet she felt a strange, growing determination. She would survive this flight. She would endure because fear alone could not protect her. Action, focus, and solidarity could. Around her, passengers whispered prayers, offered comfort, and steadied one another, realized she was not alone. In a shared crisis, courage could ripple, spreading strength even to the most terrified. Amid the roaring engines and relentless turbulence, clung to the anchor of the present moment. She was awake now, fully alert, aware of danger and mortality, yet committed to perseverance. She adjusted her mask, checked the elderly woman again, and braced herself for whatever came next. Outside, the storm raged, indifferent to human fear. Inside, passengers clung to hope, to each other, and to the calm authority of the crew. Parker, once a woman lulled by a gentle hum into sleep, had now awakened to the full weight of reality. Survival, she understood, depended on clarity, courage, and connection. The plane lurched again, violently this time, tossing against her with a force that made her stomach lurch. Every muscle in her body tightened as the aircraft shook like a leaf in a storm. The engines roared, their vibrations reverberating through the cabin, and passengers' screams blended with the metallic groans of the fuselage. His heart pounded, each beat a drum of primal fear, yet beneath the terror, a resolve began to form. Panic alone would not save her. Focus and action were now her only tools for survival. In the cockpit, the captain's hands flew over controls, toggling switches and adjusting the throttle. The co-pilot scanned instruments with tense precision, reporting pressure readings, altitude shifts, and hydraulic stability. "We've lost partial hydraulics," the captain muttered under his breath, jaw tight. Outside, the storm intensified. The lightning was closer, each flash illuminating violent, roiling clouds. The plane pitched sharply and felt her body lift slightly before crashing back into her seat. Her oxygen mask hissed softly, a cruel reminder of both danger and life support. Flight attendants moved rapidly down the aisles, guiding passengers with calm authority despite the chaos. "Remain seated. Fasten your, keep calm." Their voices cut above the roar, short and precise, each syllable a lifeline. Noticed subtle, desperate measures. A young man holding a frightened child in his lap, a mother steadying an elderly woman, a stranger offering a comforting squeeze to a panicked passenger. Acts of courage, small, human, instinctive, rippled through the cabin, anchoring terrified souls to something real amid the swirling storm. His pulse raced, yet she drew strength from these moments. She leaned toward the elderly woman beside her, offering steadying hands and whispered reassurance. "We'll get through this," she said, forcing conviction into her voice, hoping it would transfer even partially to the trembling woman. The woman nodded, trembling but anchored by his presence. Around them, similar threads of solidarity formed, a network of fragile courage connecting the cabin. Even in extreme fear, humans sought connection. Even in chaos, empathy endured. The plane pitched again, this time sharply downward. Stomach dropped, a wave of nausea hitting her as adrenaline surged through her veins. She gritted her teeth, focusing on breathing, inhaling through her nose, exhaling slowly, counting silently in her mind. Each breath became a tool, each conscious thought an anchor. She realized that survival was as much psychological as it was physical. Fear could paralyze, but clarity and presence of mind could save lives. Outside, the storm raged with unrelenting force. The aircraft was tossed like a toy, wings flexing under the strain. Lightning forked dangerously close, illuminating the turbulent cloudscape in jagged flashes. Peered through the window, stomach knotted, heart racing, yet unable to look away. She saw the wing tip flex violently, the rain driven by gale-force winds slicing across the fuselage. The plane's stability teetered on a knife's edge, a reminder that the battle was not yet won. In the cockpit, the pilots executed desperate maneuvers, adjusting the angle of descent, tweaking rudder positions, stabilizing engines. Their experience was the thin line between catastrophe and survival. "Brace for impact, minor turbulence adjustments," the captain called out over the intercom, a controlled calm threading his voice despite the urgency. Tightened her instinctively, pressing her head lightly against the window, bracing for another violent sway. Each movement of the plane was a test, each second a negotiation with gravity and nature itself. Felt herself shaking, not from cold but from raw fear. Yet she drew on a strange, primal energy that surged from adrenaline. Her eyes scanned the cabin, noting who might need assistance, where she could help, how she could maintain calm. She noticed a young mother beside her struggling to keep her child's mask secure, reached over, helping her adjust it. The child's wide eyes met hers briefly and whispered, "You're okay. We'll get through this together." Small acts like these became both shield and sword against fear. Turbulence reached a peak. The plane pitched violently, then lurched sharply upward, eliciting screams and gasps from the cabin. Felt her body lift slightly, then crash back into her seat. She closed her eyes, focusing on grounding herself. Every passenger was at the mercy of forces beyond their control, yet the act of breathing, of maintaining awareness, became an assertion of agency. The plane, though buffeted and unstable, was still moving, still alive, a fragile vessel carrying human hope through chaos. Around her, small pockets of resilience continued to form. A teenager whispered reassurances to her crying mother. A man comforted his with gentle words. A flight attendant guided an elderly woman back to her seat with steady hands. Realized that courage was not the absence of fear, it was action in spite of it. In this storm, humanity manifested in small, deliberate gestures. Every connection, every moment of reassurance, reinforced the possibility of survival. She clung to it, letting it bolster her own courage. Suddenly the plane tilted sharply, a violent jerk that sent a cup clattering from a passenger's tray. Stomach lurched again, and she instinctively pressed herself deeper into her seat. She heard the creak of metal overhead, the groan of stressed machinery. In that moment, fear and clarity intertwined. She could not control the storm nor the plane, but she could control herself. She could act. She could help. She could endure. That realization, faint but potent, became a lifeline in the maelstrom. Minutes stretched endlessly. The plane pitched, dipped, and rose again, each motion unpredictable. Senses were heightened, the smell of recycled air, the vibration of engines, the pitch of the metallic fuselage, the flashes of lightning outside. She noticed faces etched with terror, yet also those demonstrating courage. Hands holding hands, whispered reassurances, small gestures of connection. These moments crystallized in mind. Life, fragile yet persistent, persisted through human solidarity. Survival depended on awareness, focus, and action, even in the face of forces that seemed beyond comprehension. The captain's voice cut through the cabin again, measured but resolute. "We are experiencing extreme turbulence. Please remain seated, remain calm, and follow crew instructions. We are working to stabilize the aircraft." Held on to every word, letting it anchor her. She breathed, adjusted her mask, checked her neighbor, and braced herself. The storm raged outside, but inside, passengers found fragments of courage, fragments of humanity. Terror remained, but it had been tempered by resolve, action, and awareness. She understood now. Survival was not chance. It was clarity, courage, and connection. Parker's heart raced as the plane pitched and swayed violently, yet a strange focus settled over her. The storm outside raged relentlessly, lightning illuminating the sky in jagged flashes, thunder rolling like distant artillery. Passengers screamed, clutched armrests, and whispered prayers, but began to notice something remarkable: small acts of courage and kindness weaving through the chaos. A mother gently held her child, whispering assurances that seemed fragile but undeniably real. A young man steadied an elderly passenger, his hands firm despite his own fear. Humanity persisted even in the face of terror. Adjusted her own oxygen mask, bracing herself as another gust of wind sent the plane tilting violently. She glanced around, observing the cabin through wide, alert eyes. Her neighbor, the elderly woman she had been comforting, was pale but steady, eyes locked on for reassurance. Whispered, "We're going to make it. Just breathe with me." The woman exhaled slowly, following her lead, a fragile calm settling over them both. For the first time since the captain's urgent warning, felt a sliver of control, a recognition that she could contribute to others, safety even while terrified herself. Flight attendants moved with relentless efficiency, their calm authority acting as an anchor amid chaos. They guided passengers, secured loose items, and offered instructions in clipped, precise tones. Notice the subtle reassurance in their movements, a hand on a shoulder, a nod of encouragement, a gentle correction of a strap. These moments, though small, had a profound effect on the cabin. Realized that courage and composure could be contagious. By acting with calm determination, individuals could inspire those around them to do the same. She focused on emulating that calm for her neighbor. A young mother across the aisle struggled to secure her toddler's oxygen mask, reached over instinctively, helping adjust the strap and ensuring the child's mask was fitted correctly. The child's wide eyes met hers briefly and whispered, "You're safe. We're all going to be okay." The mother's hand squeezed in silent gratitude. In that fleeting moment, understood that courage could manifest in small, simple gestures, helping a neighbor, comforting a child, offering reassurance in the face of overwhelming fear. These moments became lifelines, binding strangers together in shared vulnerability and determination. The plane lurched violently, the cabin shaking as the engines roared in protest. Pressed herself into her seat, bracing against the armrest, yet she continued to scan the surrounding passengers, offering whispered words of reassurance and practical help wherever she could. She noticed a teenage girl attempting to calm her crying younger brother, leaned toward them, softly suggesting breathing techniques she had learned in stress management classes. "Inhale slowly. Exhale slowly," she murmured, demonstrating with her own breaths. The girl followed her instructions, and a small measure of calm returned to her brother. Felt a surge of quiet pride. Humanity could persevere even in the darkest circumstances. Lightning illuminated the storm outside again, revealing the plane buffeted by violent gusts. The wings flexed under the strain and rain lashed at the fuselage. Felt the full force of the turbulence, her stomach dropping with every sudden tilt. Yet amid the chaos, she noticed more acts of bravery. A man reaching out to steady a stranger, a woman whispering comfort to a frightened child, a passenger quietly praying while simultaneously helping others adjust masks. These acts formed a network of resilience, each person supporting the next, creating a fragile but vital chain of strength. Focus sharpened with every moment. She realized that fear alone would paralyze her, but purposeful action could restore agency. She helped the elderly woman adjust her, ensured her oxygen mask was secure, and guided her hands to hold onto a nearby strap for stability. The woman nodded faintly, exhaling shakily, and felt a small measure of control return. Around her, other passengers began to mirror these actions, offering reassurance and assistance in small but meaningful ways. The cabin, though still terrified, became a space of shared determination. The captain's voice came over the intercom once more, calm but resolute. "We are navigating extreme turbulence. Please remain seated, follow crew instructions, and stay calm. We are taking every measure to stabilize the aircraft." Clung to his words, repeating them in her mind like a mantra. She looked around and realized that the passengers' collective courage, amplified by the crew's professionalism, was transforming fear into action. In the midst of chaos, humanity, small acts of compassion, deliberate courage, had the power to shape survival. Another jolt shook the cabin violently, sending hair whipping around her face. She steadied herself and glanced at the young mother she had helped earlier. The child clutched her tightly, eyes wide, but noticed a faint steadiness in their breathing. "You're doing great," she whispered softly. The mother nodded, gripping her child with newfound resolve. Across the aisle, other passengers had begun to mirror these subtle acts, offering hands, words, and reassurance wherever they could. realized that bravery was not always heroic in the dramatic sense. It often manifested in the quiet, deliberate support of others. Minutes stretched, tense and endless as the plane battled the storm, continued to move subtly in her seat, offering comfort, guidance, and reassurance. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay present, to remain vigilant. Every small action mattered, every connection reinforced resilience. Even in the heart of chaos, humanity persisted, small gestures that collectively fortified courage. Understood now that survival was not merely a matter of physics or chance. It was the interplay of awareness, action, and empathy. As lightning flashed again, focus sharpened. She scanned the cabin systematically, ensuring passengers nearby were secured and breathing steadily. She offered quiet words of encouragement, adjusting masks and as necessary. Around her, the cabin had transformed subtly. Though fear remained, small pockets of calm, courage, and human connection began to take root. Felt her own fear tempered by this awareness, replaced with a deliberate determination. Survival was not guaranteed, but action, solidarity, and humanity could tilt the balance. The plane shuddered again, violent but manageable this time as the pilots adjusted their course. Pressed her forehead lightly to the window, taking a long, steadying breath and exhaled slowly. The storm still raged outside, but inside, moments of humanity, hands held, whispers of reassurance, gentle gestures of comfort, formed a lifeline that stretched across the cabin. Had discovered something profound. Even in the most extreme circumstances, courage persisted, and human empathy could transform fear into hope. Survival, she realized, was now a shared, collective endeavor. Parker pressed herself firmly against her, knuckles white as the plane tilted violently once more. The storm outside still raged, thunder roaring and lightning slicing across the sky, but inside, a subtle shift was beginning. The pilot's skilled hands had regained partial control, and the violent, unpredictable lurches had eased slightly. Though the turbulence persisted, it was no longer a chaotic frenzy. There was method to the movement, a sign that the storm might not claim them yet. Clung to that realization, drawing a small, fragile thread of hope from it. Around her, passengers began to notice the difference. Breathing, while still rapid, was less frantic. Eyes that had been wide with terror now flickered with cautious awareness, scanning one another and the cabin. Flight attendants moved deliberately, adjusting masks, tightening and giving calm instructions. "We're stabilizing. Please remain seated and follow crew instructions," one announced, her voice steady and assured. Felt her own tension ease fractionally, though her heart still pounded. The storm's grip had loosened slightly, and with it came the possibility that they might endure. Took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand, helping others remain calm. The elderly woman beside her was pale, lips pressed tightly together, but she followed lead as they synchronized their breathing. Whispered, "One breath at a time, in, out, steady." The woman's hand squeezed hers in response, a small acknowledgement of solidarity and trust. Around them, similar moments of quiet courage unfolded. Strangers steadied one another, comforted children, and offered gentle reassurances. The storm was not yet over, but humanity's resilience was shining through. Lightning flashed again outside, illuminating the cabin in stark, jagged relief. The plane shuddered slightly, but it was no longer violent enough to elicit screams. Glanced out the window, seeing the chaos of the storm with new awareness. The pilots had adjusted altitude and course, navigating toward a corridor of calmer air. The violent gusts still buffeted the fuselage, but the plane now moved with purpose rather than being tossed like a toy. Felt a glimmer of control return, not over the aircraft but over her own response. She could act, she could help, she could endure. Flight attendants continued their rounds, calm but alert, followed their lead, checking masks and reassuring those nearby. She noticed the young mother she had helped before, now sitting more composed, her child's breathing steadier. Across the aisle, a man offered his hand to a terrified passenger, guiding them through a minor panic attack. Felt a sense of quiet pride. Even in the face of life-threatening danger, people could rise to extraordinary acts of compassion. Courage, she realized, was often quiet, deliberate, and contagious. The captain's voice came over the intercom once more, calm and precise. "Ladies, we have regained partial control of the aircraft. The storm is still severe, but we are navigating toward calmer air. Please remain seated and continue to follow crew instructions." Clung to every word, letting the captain's authority anchor her. Around her, passengers' expressions shifted subtly. Fear remained, but it was tempered by hope. The storm was formidable, but the human spirit was proving equally resilient. Focused on her own breathing, inhaling slowly and exhaling deliberately, letting each breath steady her racing heart. She glanced around the cabin, offering quiet words of reassurance to anyone within reach. Her actions were small, almost imperceptible, but they mattered. The elderly woman beside her mirrored her breathing. The young mother's child now clutched her hand more securely, and even strangers exchanged nods of recognition and solidarity. In the midst of chaos, these connections were a lifeline binding passengers together in a shared struggle for survival. Outside, the storm showed signs of weakening. Lightning flashes became less frequent, and the rolling thunder receded slightly in intensity. Rain continued to lash the plane, but the wind no longer had the same ferocious strength. Noticed these changes through the window, her pulse slowing fractionally. The pilot's adjustments were working. The aircraft, though battered, was regaining stability. She allowed herself a brief mental acknowledgement of relief, cautious, measured but genuine. They were not out of danger yet, but they were no longer at the mercy of the storm entirely. Continued to move subtly in her seat, helping those nearby, adjusting masks, and offering whispered reassurances. She noticed the ripple effect of her actions. Passengers who saw her assisting others became more composed themselves, their fear less paralyzing. Humanity's collective courage was proving to be a force, a counterbalance to the storm's relentless assault. Marveled at the resilience around her. In a confined cabin thousands of feet above the earth, ordinary people were performing extraordinary acts, proving that courage could endure even when everything seemed lost. The plane pitched and swayed, but now with a discernible pattern rather than chaotic unpredictability. Focus sharpened, her mind alert but no longer overwhelmed by sheer panic. She noticed a flight attendant checking rows systematically, ensuring masks were secure and fastened, moving with calm authority. Mirrored these actions in her own small circle, steadying the elderly woman, guiding the young mother, and offering words of comfort. The storm still raged outside, but inside, the cabin had become a place of deliberate action and shared resilience. A particularly violent gust rocked the plane momentarily, eliciting a brief scream, but it was followed by the hum of engines stabilizing, the aircraft responding to the pilot's skilled adjustments. His pulse raced, yet she felt a profound sense of clarity. Fear was still present, but it had become a tool rather than a prison. Every breath, every small act of courage, every moment of calm was a thread holding her and those around her steady. Survival was now a tangible possibility, woven from determination, action, and the human spirit. Minutes passed, tense but progressively less terrifying. Continued to assist those near her, offering support wherever it was needed. She noticed passengers starting to calm, whispering quietly to one another, taking deep breaths and clasping hands in silent solidarity. The storm outside still loomed, but the pilot's efforts were paying off. The violent chaos had begun to give way to manageable turbulence. Allowed herself a fleeting sense of cautious optimism. They were enduring, surviving, and inching closer to safety. Glanced at the elderly woman beside her and whispered, "We're almost through this. Stay with me." The woman squeezed her hand, eyes wide but steadier than before. Around the cabin, other passengers were mirroring these interactions, small acts of courage creating ripples that strengthened everyone's resolve. Realized the truth. Even when nature seemed insurmountable, human connection and deliberate action could make the difference between despair and hope. They were not out of danger yet, but a glimmer of hope had emerged, a fragile, luminous thread connecting all aboard. The storm outside began to wane, clouds thinning slightly, though streaks of rain still raced across the windows. Parker pressed her forehead gently against the cool glass, breathing deeply, listening to the faint hum of the engines that now seemed more controlled, more predictable. The violent turbulence that had dominated the past hours had eased into intermittent shakes. For the first time since the captain's urgent warning, she felt a fragile sense of hope that the ordeal was nearing its end. The pilot's skill had won back control, and for the passengers, survival was no longer a distant dream. It was imminent. Around her, the cabin had transformed. The cacophony of screams and frantic whispers had dwindled into subdued murmurs. Faces were pale but calmer. Some passengers closed their eyes to steady themselves. Others held hands, drawing courage from one another. Flight attendants moved deliberately, checking, adjusting oxygen masks, and offering calm reassurances. "We are descending to a safer altitude," one announced. Chest tightened with relief. Every word of instruction, every measured movement from the crew was now a lifeline, anchoring passengers who had endured a terrifying ordeal. Glanced at the elderly woman beside her, who now wore a faint, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling but sincere. Squeezed her hand gently in response, a silent acknowledgement of their shared resilience. Across the aisle, the young mother held her child close, both of them breathing slowly, their terror tempered by the gradual return of stability. Realized that, while the storm had tested everyone's courage, it had also revealed something deeper: the capacity of ordinary people to act decisively and compassionately under extraordinary pressure. The plane's descent began in earnest, engines humming steadily as the pilots navigated through thinning clouds. Clutched her seat, her eyes wide, scanning the cabin. She observed countless small gestures of humanity, passengers helping neighbors adjust, comforting frightened children, whispering encouraging words. The chaos of fear had transformed into a network of quiet strength, a collective effort to endure and survive. Felt an overwhelming sense of admiration for her fellow passengers, and a profound gratitude for the crew's professionalism and skill. Lightning had disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving a muted gray light that slowly brightened with the sun's reluctant return. Pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart beginning to steady. The plane's movements were no longer violent, merely gentle undulations, evidence that the pilots had successfully guided them through the worst. She allowed herself a small smile, a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had survived the storm. Each breath she took was a reminder of the fragility and preciousness of life. As the aircraft descended, noticed passengers exchanging quiet smiles, nods, and gestures of shared relief. Even the flight attendants, though exhausted, radiated calm authority, ensuring every passenger remained seated and secure until landing. The collective experience had created an unspoken bond among everyone on board. Strangers who had screamed and cried together had now endured together, their fear replaced by cautious optimism. Understood that trauma had a way of forging unexpected connections, and in this shared ordeal, humanity had shone brighter than any storm. The captain's voice cut through the cabin, calm but jubilant. "Ladies, and we are approaching a safe altitude. The storm has passed, and we will begin preparations for landing shortly. Thank you for your patience and courage." Exhaled slowly, relief washing over her in a wave so powerful it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Around her, passengers muttered words of gratitude, whispered prayers of thanks, and clutched each other in silent acknowledgement of survival. The ordeal had tested their limits, but now hope had fully returned. Glanced out the window as the plane broke through the final layers of cloud, revealing the sprawling landscape below. The city lights of Los Angeles shimmered in the early evening, an oasis of calm after the chaos of the storm. Her eyes filled with tears as the magnitude of what they had endured sank in. The ordinary flight she had boarded hours earlier had transformed into a crucible of fear, courage, and resilience. Now, finally, they were returning to the familiar, the solid, the safe. As the plane touched down, engines humming in controlled power, felt her muscles relax for the first time. Applause and murmurs of relief echoed through the cabin as wheels met tarmac. The flight attendants moved swiftly but calmly, guiding passengers through final safety instructions and preparing for disembarkation. Pressed her release, stretching cramped limbs, and allowed herself a deep, satisfying exhale. Survival was no longer uncertain, it was reality. Once the plane taxied to the gate, stood, helping the elderly woman rise beside her. Their eyes met again, a silent acknowledgement of shared endurance and triumph. Around them, passengers gathered belongings, whispered farewells, and thanked flight attendants with heartfelt gratitude. Stepped into the aisle, glancing around at the expressions of relief, exhaustion, and quiet pride. Strangers who had faced fear together were now bonded in a profound, unspoken way. In the aftermath, humanity's capacity for courage, empathy, and resilience was unmistakable. As walked down the jet bridge into the terminal, the events of the flight replayed in her mind. The sudden warning, the violent turbulence, the acts of courage and solidarity that had carried them through. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her heart was steady. She realized that fear, while terrifying, had also revealed the depths of human strength. In the face of uncertainty and danger, ordinary people could rise to extraordinary courage. Had been tested, but she had endured. So had everyone else on board. Outside, the city stretched before her, bathed in the soft glow of evening light. Inhaled deeply, savoring the solid ground beneath her feet and the familiar sounds of life. She thought of her family, her friends, and all those she had nearly left behind in fear. Gratitude surged through her, mingled with a renewed appreciation for the fragility and resilience of life. Every breath, every heartbeat, every human connection had mattered. The flight had ended, but its lessons would stay with her forever. Parker paused, looking back at the plane that had carried them through terror and chaos. She felt a profound sense of awe, not just for the skill of the pilots, not just for the courage of the crew, but for the resilience of humanity itself. Strangers had become allies, fear had become action, and hope had endured where despair could have prevailed. The storm had tested them, and in surviving, they had discovered the extraordinary strength that resides within ordinary people. With one final deep breath, stepped into the terminal, her heart full of relief, gratitude, and a quiet sense of triumph. The ordeal was over, but the memory would remain, a testament to courage, empathy, and the unyielding human spirit. The city stretched before her, alive and steady, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, light and hope could prevail. Had survived, and in doing so, she had witnessed humanity at its most resilient, most compassionate, and most extraordinary.